to the Deep Dive podcast. Today, I thought I'd bring up an interesting topic. It's something I refer to as sacred insanity. And my first thought is Friedrich Nietzsche. When he went insane in his mid-50s or so, there was a lot of speculation around whether his condition was physical in nature or psychological in nature, or what was referred to as a kind of sacred insanity, which is really speaking to this spiritual component of a fragile or volatile mental state, and where that shows up for really, let's just say, esoteric minds or deep thinkers such as Friedrich Nietzsche or Carl Jung, or maybe even some of the more contemporary thinkers that kind of just dip a toe in that pool and don't really know whether they want to go towards the dry side of reality, so to speak. Another example would be Terrence Mckenna, but I think I'd like to stick more to those thinkers that maybe delved into some psychoactive compounds or substances, but not necessarily to the degree to which Terrence Mckenna did. So where do we see this idea come up nowadays? The sacred insanity could be something that we have seen throughout society, throughout history, really, in terms of shamanism. So the schizophrenic person who was labeled schizophrenic by Western society, but in the Eastern cultures or in various other cultures that don't adhere to the concepts of Western mental health, would start to see this connection between this, again, fragile or volatile state of mind, and there being a sacred or spiritual component to that mental state. And when we look to the spectrum of how the brain operates in terms of its neurological sort of imprint, we see that most people, well, all people actually, they fall under this spectrum of either overly chaotic, which is where the nervous system branches out and is actively seeking for or attempting to solve problems that probably aren't solvable, or maybe in this lifetime or reality aren't solvable, versus the overly rigid, deeply neurologically engrooved, on some level obsessive thinker, which is the opposite, in contrast to the overly chaotic thinker. So maybe this sacred insanity is just simply the person who is tapped in through means of the overly chaotic mind, and there seems to be a sort of coalescence or transcending of this reality to which our mind is consciously tethered to. In Carl Jung's case, he actually was able to tap into this type of, again, let's just refer to as unified consciousness, in a way where he left and came back. And he likened this to being motivated through having a strong desire to return. So people who relied on him, feelings of regret, guilt, or remorse about not being able to fulfill his purpose within society. Whereas Friedrich Nietzsche probably didn't care about those things as much. He really spent a lot of time as something of a loner, or very much of a loner, and he spent a lot of time despising the close company of others. Even though he desired connection, there was a general disconnection with his life. So once he reached this point of where he could hop off into this other realm or dimension, there was likely very little desire to return, or not as much motivation as Carl Jung. So, sacred insanity. Is it a one-way trip? Is it something that we could see being more pervasive within a culture that is open to experimenting with different states of consciousness or theories around them? Not just localizing this discussion to psychedelics. I think there is a degree to which a schizophrenic person may access certain mind expanding ideas and channels to which we might be attempting to access through psychedelics and may or may not successfully. So what do you think? Do you think this is an idea that is real? What is real, really? But do you think this is something that you might, on some level, experiment with, or one day be curious of? Would you return if you were able to access some sort of greater divinity on the magnitude of, like, say, Buddha or a god, essentially? Now, interestingly enough, the word God, one of the, let's say, symptoms of the psychological / spiritual version of insanity that was speculated upon why Nietzsche was someone not necessarily just going crazy based on a physical ailment. There was this type of grandiosity that was experienced. So he wrote letters to some of his close friends where he would reference himself as Dionysus, the god of wine and partying, essentially. But Dionysus was not just that Greek archetype to Nietzsche. He was this embodiment of his higher self, or the savior on some level, or a kind of godlike figure, a remanifestation of Zarathustra, who was the comer, or who was the one who brought the Christian morality into effect. So it was essentially his undoing of Zarathustra, was Dionysus. So, little discussion or navigating around this concept of sacred insanity. If you felt that was interesting, I appreciate you checking in and seeing what that's all about. And be well.